Work that mother. Work that mother. Work that mother. Work that mother. Work that
Good evening. My name is Bruce Montgomery, and thank you for joining me on this edition of Technology Access Television. Well, today we're going to continue in a dialogue talking about marketing, not so much the past, but the present and maybe the future of marketing, and more specifically advertising. Last month we started a dialogue around marketing research, and we talked about does black still matter in the arena of marketing in this new dynamic. And you know, it's all about messaging when you're talking about marketing, and that brings us to the realm of advertising. Here is a field that we've all been impacted in, yet different dynamics are afoot. And I'm fortunate today to have a friend of mine who has seen the highs and the lows from Madison Avenue to Michigan Avenue, spent an entire career in this wild and woolly field of advertising, and he's going to talk about his reflections on this industry again, opportunities that he sees today, and even a book that he's written. It's a take on some excitement that we have all seen in this industry, and of course I think you'll find this conversation very enlightening from the perspective of one who is both a published author in this realm, but more importantly a practitioner in this realm of advertising. My guest today is Jim Glover. Jim, thank you for joining me.
You're very welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Well, old friend, it's good to see you. I'm delighted to, it's funny, in this industry of advertising and marketing, you know, most people, I've been in the tech world for a good quarter of a century now, and it's been a long time since I was on Michigan Avenue myself in the ad business. Most people see me today and they say, that's that tech guy. But before I was a tech guy, I was a wannabe ad guy.
I remember.
And the thing about it is, what's so amazing is even after being out of the business, you're never really out of the business.
Right.
But it seems like all the friends and all the contacts and all the folks that I knew are still the main players in that field. And I have been in that field for a quarter of a century. What does that say about advertising, especially for our community? For there to be such a small cadre of folks who take this on as a profession and kind of stick with it for seemingly a long time, like yourself?
Well, I think there's been many of us who got into the field back in the 70s. And most of those people that got into the business through affirmative action programs and different ad groups that popped up back then in New York and in Chicago are still around. Some have agencies. Carol H. Williams still has an agency. Tom Burrell still has an agency. And then a lot of us, like myself and Phil Gant and a few other people, went and worked in the general market side. And we're still here, still trying to hold on.
But you know, it's been I guess I went from the frying pan to the fire, going from advertising to technology. Both industries are very similar in that you oftentimes don't have a perception of the role that African Americans and minorities play in these industries. Whenever you look at the poster boys of these industries, you don't think of the presence, the African American, the black presence, and the great contribution that is made. You know, again, you worked for some of the most storied names in the business, both in New York. Well, you're a New Yorker. You
Right.
growing up in New York. Did obviously the home of Madison Avenue. Was this something that you aspired to as a young man when you were in college and you were moving your way? Is this what you thought you wanted to do as you hit the street?
I never thought I would be in advertising. Okay. That was the furthest thing from my mind. In fact, I was one of those kids in the street, and I was one of those kids who Madison Avenue, plucked out of the streets and brought in to teach. During that time, it was, Johnson was in office, and there was this whole democratic attitude among corporate America because of the 60s and, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and the riots and everything else. And clients were starting to demand that they see some African American faces on their business. So they went out any way they could and just started hiring people. And that's when groups popped up like the GAP program and that Tom Burrell was in.
Right.
And, we all knew about what was going on out there among the advertising community, because they were also being sued at that time by the NAACP in New York, which I mentioned in my book. So there was a lot of pressure on ad agencies to recruit African Americans. And, back to what I said before, that's how most of us got in the business.
That's right. That's exactly right. Here in Chicago, there was a program, and it's funny because that program was around, and me and a friend of mine wanted to be in the program. And so when they asked us what we wanted to be, well, I said I wanted to be an account supervisor. And the guy looked at me like, what are you talking about? You got two choices here. You could be a writer or you could be an art director. And I didn't particularly think I was that good at art.
Right.
I never thought about it, but I saw myself as an account man. I wanted to be an account man. So the guy said, well, this program isn't for account people. And he sent me home.
Wow.
So then my boy wised up and said he wanted to be a copywriter. So then he got accepted. So then I came back the next day. I said, well, look, I want to be a writer. The guy said, no. I remember you. You're a smart aleck joker. You go to the back of the class.
But that's funny. The same thing happened to me. Y&R called a bunch of kids down from the hood, basically, and asked us what we wanted to be. So I didn't know what they were talking about. Right. I didn't have any idea. So they put me in the media department.
Okay.
And then I was there like a day or something, and the guy said, no, he's no good for media.
And isn't that something that, again, how
they reached
in not
out.
so long a time, this country has changed from opening doors for minorities to be involved in these different industries. And I don't care whether it was Wall Street or whether it was Silicon Valley or whether it was any different area. There was a door opening, and blacks were able to get jobs at IBM, at Xerox, at Y&R, at McCann, at these different places. And this was the first wave of people coming in. But we've seen a big turn in this country, and it was a very difficult horse to stay on. Once you got in the business and you started to get your legs under you, and you quite accomplished. You've won awards, you've created, in fact, I would imagine a lot of the awards that you won were for general market activity.
General market agencies.
That's right, was not
I didn't win many in black agencies, but in general market, I won a lot of awards.
So then you see this industry start, it starts to go back inward, it starts to homogenize. It starts to go back to the way it was, I guess, in the 40s and 50s, just like on the TV show Mad Men.
Right.
When,
right.
They're not any diversity presence. But yet and still, America has presumably become more diverse. It's more diverse than it ever was. What's with advertising that they are not as inclusive of black talent rising through the ranks to take key positions in this industry?
Well, I mean, you have to take a look at history. When they did let us in, when you think about all the things that we had to do to get into the industry, all the marches and everything, right? Well, once we got in, that was the beginning of the real battle. Mm-hmm. The real battle was fighting racism in these corporations, not only advertising, like you said. That happened across the board. So there was a new challenge for us. Mm-hmm. And I think, a lot of us, I know myself and, some other people, we had a bit of a chip on our shoulder, because we had kind of come through the 60s and we were really looking, to see what corporate America was going to do for us. And a lot of us were kicked out of the business because we saw racial things happening and we mentioned it. A story, remember I was telling you yesterday about them picketing Y&R in the Madman
Right.
episode. Well, that really happened. And when the agency saw that one of their a lot of that going on, and we always say that there was no one that came after us. And you ask why. We had hit the glass ceiling, so to speak. We all grew in the business and got to that point where we were supposed to be supervisors, creative directors, and directors and bosses in the industry. And that's when the real truth hit us. That's why so many of us came out here and opened agencies and tried other businesses, because in the general market area, we were not allowed to go any further. So that frustration led us to other endeavors. Why they didn't let more in after us, in my experience, it had a lot to do with all of a sudden we were able to come in without many credentials. We didn't have to have college degrees. All we had to do was be black. So, but after us, when they started recruiting African Americans, all of a sudden you had to have a degree. You had to have excelled at the portfolio center or whatever school it was. And
was that a double standard? I mean,
it was a double standard,
Right.
because I had to hire whites. When I had my group in the general market agency, I had to hire whites with no experience at all. Once, because this guy's steel mill went out of business and his son was interested in advertising, they sent his son over to Leo Burnett and they told me to train him.
just hire him, train
With
him.
nothing. And I was trying to get blacks in the agency, and they were like,
They had to come from Harvard and
yeah,
have
yeah.
3 degrees.
Well,
and go to
his portfolio is not up to par, up to our standards. And I'm like saying to myself, not to degrade, Leo Burnett, but it's like, your standards aren't that high in this business
That's
overall.
right. That's right. And so what's happened is only until recently, this has been an industry, and it's funny how the advertising industry kind of stays under the radar, that this is still a very powerful industry, is still an industry where a lot of money is made. It's not unusual for people to have 6-figure salaries and command a lot of respect, but it's still under the radar screen. It's,
Yes.
it's an industry that is not talked about that much, not known about that much. And when you talk to young people about pursuing careers, rarely do you hear someone say that they want to be involved in this industry, that they know about advertising. And it's interesting today because now we're in this entire new paradigm of different media types. Now, what used to be just print and broadcast and
Right,
radio and
right.
television, now this whole Pandora's box of new media, digital media is out there. As you think about your craft, as you're primarily a message maker, a strategist, a writer, someone who codifies the language to support brand development. What do you think about this whole wild and woolly time that we have today with digital media and all this different stuff going on? Are you excited that this creates the kind of opportunity that levels the playing field so that small or mid-sized firms can be just as aggressive marketers and maybe capture, as they have captured in the last 5 years, whole new ground seemingly out of nowhere because of these new opportunities?
Well, I think there are a lot of new opportunities. I think that the industry overall is not. I mean, when you talk about advertisers, I don't think that they're as aware that African Americans are that up on all the new technology. And we are. The digital divide back in the beginning of the dot-com boom doesn't exist anymore.
That's right.
And we're indexing higher than the general market on almost every, in social media, on our use of cell phones, on our time on the internet. we index higher than the general market. So, but I'm not seeing that manifest in the marketplace. I'm not seeing anyone go after us, in the social media realm, in this new technology realm. And I'm not also seeing that agencies, African American agencies, are prepared to compete in this new digital marketplace. Some agencies are. I mean, I don't want to mention names, but
Right.
some really aren't.
Well, Chicago is really fortunate that right now Chicago is having its own little mini tech boom. And with the phenomenal schools that we have, schools like Columbia College, DePaul, Northwestern, these media savvy schools that have been teaching traditional film, television, advertising, they're now delving into all of these new areas, which is creating a huge pool of new talent ready to be engaged in this field. As you continue to move ahead, what's your strategy for your new agency? How are you going to position your new agency to serve clients in a unique way? Because you're exactly right. There's a huge, every year, the buying power of African American minorities gets larger and larger. Yet when you look at the pretty corny way that companies attempt to communicate, it seems like the class has gone out of the advertising. So then how are you going to, as a message maker, begin to encourage brands to class up their conversations with this market and maybe do it in ways using new technology?
Well, I've started a company called Multicultural Creative Consultants. And what we're doing is going after clients and general market agencies and black agencies. And we want to give them superior African American creative that they would not have on their own. In other words, I don't want to compete with black agencies, but for white agencies that have general market accounts, but that also advertise to African Americans, and it may not be enough business for them to hire a black agency, or maybe their budget doesn't allow hiring a black agency.
Now, isn't this somewhat also kind of problematic in our new paradigm? Because again, in the 60s or 70s or late 70s, early 80s, there was this phenomenon of the general market agencies and then black agencies. But in this new era where, again, now I don't know what the demographics of a typical agency is, but I would be astounded if these agencies weren't diverse. And so that's pretty amazing.
Well, you would be astounded
that
then.
These guys have still managed to keep these bastions of homogeneity and not be inclusive prospects. So they really then need
There is a need.
There is a need for this kind of activity. Well, let's flip the script just a little bit and talk about you've taken the time to find another creative outlet for your conversation and your complete understanding of this business by writing a book called Mad Man.
I didn't steal the title.
I know. This is something else. Tell us about this book, Mad Man. What is this all about?
Well, the book is basically about an African American creative who was blackballed and wasn't able to get a job back in the industry. And his ways of coping with it was pretty unique. But the book is a thriller.
Okay.
Okay, so advertising is just the backdrop of something that is already happening in the business. And racism in the business is unfortunately true. I mean, you go on any site that talks about diversity in advertising and you can see that. So I use that to create a thriller that is about revenge. This guy could not get a job back in the business once he had left. Now, that's true to an extent. Out here in the real marketplace, most African Americans who leave general market agencies and go to African American agencies, for some reason, can't go back. Because they say, well, now you're in now you're in the black marketing arena, so I don't think you can do this anymore. I mean, they use all kinds of excuses not to let us back in. So this guy wouldn't take it. And so he decided to extort money from his old bosses because he felt that the companies that they were working for had gotten a lot of their success off of his commercials. And then they wouldn't let him back in, who had created wealth for the company. So he decided to take matters in his own hands.
Now, when I heard this story and you gave me a copy of the book and I read it over, and it's such a, like I have to admit, I watch Mad Men on TV regularly because again, it's so funny when you have a context in which to look at this stuff and you can point guys out and say, yeah, I know a guy that acted just like this and just like that. And you know the characters. But to read your book did it one better because obviously you are taking it from a perspective that we know all too well. And now you've included this other dynamic which existed all of your career. And you've turned it into a thriller, and obviously the first thing that came to my mind as I was reading this, because again, I could read through it so fast, I felt like somebody was reading it to me because I could just hear people, I could hear people talking like this and saying this and doing all this, and it just was so visual and so exciting.
Well, thank you.
I know you probably think, and I hope so many people read this book because in stories like this, it is important today for people to have a context in which to understand the history, the dynamic of some of these agencies. It would be wrong for somebody to just run into one of these places and be in la la land and not be aware of some of these dynamics that take place. But I could certainly see, so that as you move ahead in this industry and you think about how you're going to create some of the relationships, I think so much of business comes down to relationships, not just pitches, but people who know and trust and whatever of each other. Are you comfortable that you will be able, in this environment where new relations can be made, where there's a respect for the skill and talent that you have, and both agencies and brands of whatever stripe will be able to say that this is a needed value proposition here, and we want to engage constructively in this, and not because it's at the forced pressure of some overarching entity that says, yeah, you all need to do the right thing. Do you think people will come to their own senses as a result of wanting to get involved, not just with holding up the black market as this grand prize to get, but because it's important to have good relationships with all of these different markets? I know it's a complex question, but...
Well, it is, but I do think so. I think that today, as much as things that are happening in America today makes us feel that the old racism is back and the dichotomies and the separations are back between the races, I think that marketers are sensitive and are aware of how important the African American market is. A good example of that is the chorus business with Common Ground and Ahmed Islam, the president, or CEO, whichever. What's important about that is that, they're doing a campaign that was geared to the African American market, and then it was picked up to the general market. And I think today advertisers are seeing that advertising to African Americans is not just advertising to African Americans, this separate market, and let's do something for them. When you advertise to African Americans, you're really advertising to America.
Exactly right.
Because we're the trendsetters, we're the first adopters of things, and to be quite honest, we're the cool people. I don't want to say it that blatantly, but if a brand wants some of that cool and some of that swagger, then they advertise to African Americans. Now, today they're including, blacks and whites and Hispanics and everybody together in the spot. But if you want to reach America, say what kind of track would you use under a commercial like that? It would be hip hop.
Well,
Right?
I think we all know our contributions to culture. I want to thank you for your contributions, both to the literature now with your first book. You know, people always say that they have a book in them, and very few people do something about it. People have probably told Jim that he had a book in him, and he actually did something about it and got it out. Hopefully this will not be his last book. We may even see this one day, and when you see this book on the big screen, you'll say, hey, I know that guy. That's the guy from made his way from Harlem and made his way to Chicago. Now he lives in Bronzeville, and now he's writing books about advertising, but he hasn't hung up his spurs just yet. He's still involved with helping brands build a business case and a communication strategy to talk to all communities, not just the Black community. My guest today is Jim Glover, the author of Madman. Hey, I want to thank you for tuning in today and being a part of this conversation. If you'd like to get in touch with the author or get any more information about how to get your hands on this book, don't hesitate to drop us an email, send us on Facebook, give us a tweet. We're always available to support your interest in marketing and business, and we support you. And thank you for watching Technology Access Television.
Striving a lifestyle is famous. None of us is rich. My aim is to climb out of the ditch that surrounds us all. A jungle hunt to a pitfall with red bar class and study. Just bounce, bounce, bounce.